Welcome back to the Speed of Trust Book Study Podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Zadeb, and MASSP's Executive Director. In this section, The Economics of Trust, Covey explains how trust isn't just a social virtue, it's an economic driver. When trust is high, speed goes up and costs go down. When trust is low, everything slows and costs rise. It's a principle that plays out not only in business, but in schools and classrooms every single day. To dig into this idea, I'm joined by Josh Wrinkle, principal at Rochester High School. Josh has spent his 14-year career in the Rochester Community Schools, moving from science teacher to assistant principal to his current role as the principal at Rochester High. He brings practical insights about building credibility with staff, parents, and students, and how a culture of trust makes schools run more smoothly. This morning, I'm meeting with Josh Wrinkle, who's the principal at Rochester High School, and he has been in his position for how many years, Josh, has it been now?
This is going to be year 5 as a building principal.
Oh,
So,
great. Well, could
going
you
by
just
fast.
yeah, it does go by fast,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Can you just start from the beginning? Where did you go to college all the way up until landing at Rochester?
Yeah. So I often tell people that the 3 most important or most significant moments of my life were marriage to my wife, birth of my kids, and then being hired by Rochester Community Schools. So I got my bachelor's and master's from Michigan State, and was fortunate to get hired right away by Rochester Schools when I was back in 2000, I think 11, maybe at the time, as a science teacher at Rochester Adams. I was there for 6 years, and then a great opportunity came up at Rochester and Stony Creek to be an assistant principal. Very fortunate to kind of follow in behind Neil DeLuca at Rochester High, and became his assistant principal. And I served in that role for 4 years. And then, like I said, year 5 as a principal. So 14 total in education, which is mind blowing, I think, when I stop to think about it, because I can still remember my first interview to be a teacher at Adams, 14 years ago. So
And I know that you've got some little boys, so what about your family?
I do. I have an awesome wife, Sarah. She gets it. So I tell that all the time. She understands the demands of this job. And she's always amazing with accommodating for that. She's a fantastic mom to our 2 boys. We have Jack, going into 3rd grade this year, and then Nicholas, who's starting kindergarten. And they're both at Long Meadow Elementary School, which is a feeder to Rochester High. So it's great to have them in the district and right across the street if I ever need to rush over there real quick.
Ah, that's fantastic. So, I imagine you don't have a whole lot of free time, and your free time is usually family time. But what are some things
Right.
you enjoy doing?
Well, I was a coach when I was at Adams. I coached football and track, and Jack is getting into now, and so I got an opportunity to coach his football team. So I've been doing that. That's been keeping me extra busy and at the evening hours. But we just like to stay active. We're going to the parks. We're walking around, hanging out in the neighborhood. I like to go to the gym. That's kind of how I get my quiet time. And so by the time I get all those things done in a day, it's 11 o'clock and it's time to go to bed again.
For sure. I can totally understand that. All right. So, we are engaged in the Speed of Trust book study and podcast. This is a book by Stephen Covey, and I drafted you into participating with me in reading this and kind of like a self-reflection opportunity. I think as administrators, we're often so focused on other people and making sure their needs are met. Not a lot of time for like self-reflection, leadership reflection. Actually, I think this book causes you to do a lot of personal, life reflection as well.
No question.
So we're going to delve into this, and I'm really happy to have you with us today. But before we get going down that path, what's something that recently brought you joy related to school?
We had it's embargoed, so I can't get into the details, but we had some really, really good data come back for SAT on the school day testing day and our AP data. And it's something that we've been putting a lot of effort into in the building. Our staff have been amazing. They've always been very accepting of all the crazy things we want to try to boost scores, and our kids are awesome. Our community is awesome, and it all kind of came in the moving in the same direction, and the stuff that we got back is fantastic. So
Oh, yay. Well,
it's
that's a
always
proud
one of those
moment
things
for
I
me
think that
too.
I'm
That's
sorry, say
great.
again.
I said that's a proud moment for me too. I'm
Yeah,
happy to hear that.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we were really looking forward to that date coming back, and I know that a lot of building principals are watching like late June, early July when those data points come back out, and we were thrilled. So
Well, great. Well, I'd love to circle back with you on that on another
yeah,
time
absolutely.
and maybe just talk with you a little bit about what you're doing because I'm sure people are now like, hey, let's talk about that.
Sure.
So, the initial pages and sections of this book, Covey kind of conjures up this image of, being a witness in a courtroom. And if you were called as a witness, obviously the credibility of the witness has a significant impact. I think as school administrators, it's not too far-fetched for us to imagine being in a court of law and being called as a witness. And
Right.
I can tell you during my time when I was principal at Rochester High School, I was actually on the stand once, and in prep at least two or three times for issues that came up. And it's interesting because I mean, I think, yeah, I'm the school principal. Of course, I have credibility as a witness. I think I have, my years of experience, truthfulness, all of those things. So what struck you as you were reading that section and kind of reflecting on the witness that you would make and how your character would be examined?
Yeah, unfortunately it is something that a lot of us have dealt with in the past for different reasons. But I kept thinking when I was reading that, I was thinking about an old police liaison officer that we had at Rochester. His name was Steve Curtis. And he would always say that in anything that we were dealing with, a discipline situation or whatever, would always tell us, can you imagine explaining what you're doing on a courtroom stand? And that was like one of the first lessons I learned when I was an AP from him, and that stuck with me for a lot of things. And I think pre-COVID, I think we remember seeing that survey results that came out that said like building administrators were the most trustworthy people in their community. I think post-COVID, I would wonder what this results would say, but our professional lives are on display to a lot of people. They know exactly what we do. They talk in the community. They know if we're being equitable. They know if our decision making is consistent. I think they know if we're empathetic to their issues that they have. And I think all those things come together to really make you a trustworthy, valued, reliable individual in your community. And I think if you're true to those things in everything that you do, or you try to think about those things in everything that you do, then I don't think there's any way anybody can question your credibility. But the moment that you start to deviate from those things, that's when I think you create those holes that people can kind of poke at.
That's such a great piece that you shared what your school liaison said because that's so true. Early in my career, I heard something very similar. Like if you had to explain why you did what you did and it, took disciplinary action to the school board, would you feel comfortable explaining yourself, And so I think those are the same parallels, whether you're explaining it to your board or you're explaining it in a court of law. It's like we always have to be thinking through and making sure that the decision that making that we have is rational, it's applied consistently. I should say equitably rather than consistently. I
Yeah,
think that would be the better word choice. And you brought that up, that people know if we're making decisions in that way and hold us to that standard. So
right.
one of the many things I like about this book is that Covey kind of gives us tools for reflection and improvement.
Yeah.
How did you feel about taking the test there on pages 52 to 55? Did you find that helpful? Was it challenging or humbling to determine those ratings? Kind of how did you work through that?
Yeah, I definitely found it valuable, and it was definitely humbling. I think if you were true to yourself, consistent with the theme of the book, then it was definitely humbling. I had some that I felt like I could immediately answer a 5 for, And then there were a few that I was like, I don't know. And it wasn't anything necessarily like a major character flaw or something like that, but it was maybe little interactions that I think I could have done better, or or things that I did in my professional or personal life that I think I could have done better, and it probably would have come off a little bit differently to the people that I was interacting with. But then you also start to think about, I think he presents a couple different ideas in there about ways that you don't even know you're losing the trust factor, until you kind of see it in an assessment like that, and you give it some thought. And so I think, for example, I was professionally, building principles. Sometimes we want to say something and we can't say it, and that was one of those things that I don't think I could have put a 5 for. But I never really would have thought about that in terms of, how do I, like, my self-trust, or how does that come together to create the overall picture of trust for me as an individual. But yeah, I mean, I think it was definitely humble.
Yeah, I felt the same way. And like I'm sure we're being harder on ourselves too, but because that's kind of people that we are. But I was sitting there reading these and thinking, okay, well there's, I can think of it, 5 examples of when I hit this at a 5, and maybe one where I didn't. And so I kind of, like you kind of think about that. And I also think too, one thing that was I at least thought was a positive was like how I was maybe when I was younger versus where I'm at now. I definitely think that there's growth in a lot of those areas. And
Yeah.
that's another thing I like about the book is that we might kind of beat ourselves up because we're not where we want to be. But throughout the book, he tells us you can fix it. You can be better. You can improve, those relationships and that trust. And so there's always that kind of more positive feeling after you maybe have a little bit of a blow. So, how do you think working on these things will help you to become a better person, husband, father, and school administrator?
Well, I think, I mean, just in line with what you were just talking about, sometimes you get the kind of the jolt from that test, but then, you do think of a way right away where you can improve on it. And one of the things that I was thinking about and reflecting on as a dad, the follow through with my kids. And sometimes that could be like holding them accountable, but more often as building administrators, like we were talking about earlier, you're trying to find every minute in a 24-hour day that you can either connect with your family or do what you need to do for your job. And unfortunately, we know our families take the brunt of the things that we have to do for these positions. And I have 2 little boys, and I'm sure there's been times where I was like, yeah, we're gonna go to the playground today, and then I get home and I'm tired, and it's the last thing I want to do, and I kind of put it off, or we don't do it. In the eyes of a 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, they're losing trust in me. And that was kind of a jolt. That was a hard one to read. But then, like, I immediately wanted to, like, put the book down. It's like, we're going to the playground right now, you want to fix it right away. But it
Right,
just gets you thinking about that. And like I said a moment ago, into all those little situations that you deal with that you don't think about trust being impacted,
right.
but it is. And yeah, so there was definitely some things that I thought that I could do better on immediately after I read through that test.
Yeah, I think that gets to the trust yourself portion, right?
Yeah,
Of
yeah,
like, if we have a commitment, like, we had a meeting set up to do this recording, it's on your calendar, you're going to do it because you're committed to another person.
right.
But if you're committed to just yourself, like I'm going to get up this morning and go to the gym and you don't
Yeah,
because you can rationalize away, like why
right.
I'm tired, all the things. So I totally agree with that. That was a hard hit for me too. Like just made me think to myself, And Covey's example I thought was pretty crazy, where he said he
Yeah.
drank water like every day for a year because he said he was going to, like only
Yeah.
water, you know? I was like, wow, that is a committed person who's like, goes to that extreme. But I think that's definitely a takeaway that I had as well. So, how do you think, like, that as you're going through this process of reading this book and thinking about, your building and the work that you have, what does building credibility look like with your staff? 5 years in, you have that now. But when you were a new building administrator, how is that something, that you do over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you said, I enjoy the fact that right now I have it, but I also, I think what Covey points out is that we can lose it pretty quick too. And so I think for any building administrator, doing what you say you're going to do, following through with things, somebody comes to you, they could come to you with a major problem, they could come to you with a small little thing, but whatever your interaction is with them, doing what you actually tell them that you're going to do. Follow through with those sorts of things. I think that's first and foremost. I think being equitable, that was something I don't know if I ever really struggled with it, but I think sometimes I was probably weaker at it than others. I think about you're dealing with maybe two colleagues that aren't getting along on a certain issue, and then you trying to make everybody happy, so you kind of play both sides of the fence, and that you lose, right, in the long run there. So I think things like that, avoiding those, just being, saying what you mean and saying what you feel in a respectful manner, but not trying to mince words with certain things. I think that's something that I think I'm getting better at in conversations with staff. But I think above anything is just, it goes back to me to the empathy. You are a loving, caring person. They know that when they come to you, you're not thinking critically of them. You're not judging them or anything like that. And I think that instantly makes you a more credible person, a more trusted person, when they know that that's what's in your heart, and that's first and foremost what you're trying to convey to them. And I think those three things, if you get all those three things mastered, you're probably pretty good with your staff.
Yeah, that's true. So, that takes time, that takes
Sure.
experience, and along the way, as an administrator, you're going to make a mistake. So, have you had a time where you had to restore credibility after a misstep?
Yeah, I kind of touched on it a second ago with that example of kind of playing both sides of a conflict. And I think it's a difficult thing, I think, for anybody in leadership. You want to be liked, right? You want to make everybody happy. But the reality is it's never going to happen. And I think as a younger administrator, particularly as an AP, when you're dealing with some of those conflicts, I recall some situations that I kind of did that. And then I had to, I kind of start to lose trust with both sides because of the interactions that I'm having. And there was a few times where I had to kind of come back around and say, listen, I apologize. This is being open and honest. I was trying to make sure that I kind of ended up in a position where I, was still thought of well by both sides. I wasn't making anybody upset. But in that circumstance, I ended up just making both parties upset. So there was definitely some situations like that I can recall, especially as a younger administrator, that definitely needed a restorative component to those things.
Yeah, I can remember one time when I was in Rochester, I was working with our APs on a pretty intense situation, and I had to call central office to get guidance on how to handle it, and I misunderstood the what my supervisor had directed. So I came back to the team and said, "This is the direction we're going in. This is what central office can support." And as we started working through it, um, central office got more involved, and it was clear, like, I didn't purposefully miscommunicate it to my assistant principals. I literally misunderstood what the direction was. And so I had to, take ownership of that and say, look, I made a mistake. I misinterpreted, I think I was reading more into the person's like body language and things than I was what was
Sure,
actually
sure.
coming out of their mouth, because it was like I said, a pretty intense situation. But what I found was, and I was grateful for, was admitting that I had made a mistake, owning the fact that I had misinterpreted, I went a long way, and, was able to repair the situation because I took ownership of it and said, look, I made a mistake here, and I think that's what this does get back to. And that's once again reminding us that we can restore those relationships and that trust if we're willing to take the ownership and, like, restore it by not doing it again, I think is another key piece.
Yeah, we all in leadership, we all have to have the ability to fall on our sword from time to time, and I think that most people by nature are forgiving if if we're very open about, hey, listen, like you said, I made a mistake, I misinterpreted this, whatever, I jumped the gun on this decision, and I think most people will move forward with us if we're just open and honest about our errors and like you said, make a conscious effort to actually change them. Then
Yes. Yeah.
definitely.
All right, so on page 60, Covey reminds us, as you read the following chapters, be aware that these four cores of credibility apply not only individually, but also organizationally. So I'm gonna like read this paragraph here. As you read the following chapters, be aware that these four cores of credibility apply not only individually, but organizationally. A vice president of marketing in a large company recently told me that these four cores would become their marketing blueprint. He said, we need to be credible as an organization. We need to ensure that customers understand our reputation around integrity. We need to declare our intent to help them win. We need to show them our capabilities to add value to their organizations. We need to demonstrate our results and track record to them so that they will stay with us. The net result of all of this will be credibility. And with that credibility, we'll be able to establish and sustain long term relationships of trust. Our business has already demonstrated that long term relationships are the key to profitable growth. So obviously, this is correlation to a business context.
Sure.
But I think that paragraph has a lot of correlation to the school setting. What problems do you think that schools can encounter when there's a credibility problem in the community? And on the flip side, what is schools that have high credibility in their community not dealing with because they have the trust?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is something in the last few years that I think that a lot of districts are dealing with, schools are dealing with. And I think I think our communities, regardless of where we are, I think they want to be involved. I think they want to have a seat at the table. They want to have discussion with us. And if we're open to that and we're willing to kind of hear from our community and receive that feedback, I think that makes us more trustworthy to them. But I think that thinking about Rochester High, this is something that we've really tried to work on a lot over the years, is just showing how much we care, how much we're willing to help, how much we're willing to listen. And I think that starts to establish a building that has a lot of credibility. And I think that eventually the community doesn't really question it as much anymore. We talk about at Rochester, we talk about being like a Falcon family. And that can hold zero weight if we don't actually show that we are. We had a situation just the other day where we've switched over our mass communication system in our district. And it's a fantastic program, but it's not totally without any, little small issues or bugs or whatever right now. And we understood that some of our community were not getting all of our communications. And so I got on social media and I kind of recorded a video and I just said, email me. And like, here's my email address. Send me an email if you have a problem. And I had a parent last night at one of our events say that you just said, here's my email me, contact me. And I could tell that that person felt so much better, more comfortable about their connection to the school. And so I think at the end of the day, I think what it boils down to is just we have to be people. We have to make sure that we're exhibiting our true selves, our hearts, and making sure that they know that we care about them. And I think if we do that, we do it consistently, and we think about it in everything we do, the trust factor, I think, just goes right along with it.
Well, you hit in on a number of key things there. I think communication is like essential. You know,
Absolutely.
communication, transparency, listening and acting when, if parents or staff or students identify something that's problematic, that you're willing to listen and, not just put up your defenses and give them all the yeah but reasons why you can't do that, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I think that's a big piece. But I really think that there's a lot of takeaways in what that paragraph talks about in
Yeah.
terms of making sure that we're doing all of these things, to be able to have that level of credibility. And when you have it, you're able to move things quickly. I
Right.
think that whole idea of high trust, high speed, low cost, it's just so true, that we, think about that. If people trust you, you can move quickly and you can make great things happen. But if they don't, we have to have 20 committees and, and
Sure. Sure.
right? Because
Couple town hall meetings and stuff like that,
yeah,
right? Oh yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So, where do you see self-trust playing the biggest role in your life? We kind of talked about, going to the playground, as being something that, you kind of recognized. But
Yeah.
where does that self-trust come in for you as an administrator?
Yeah, when you're talking about the self-trust in this chapter, you think a lot about the personal discipline, like we said, following through with what you say you're going to do, whether it's for yourself, for your family, for your staff. But I think the confidence factor really was what stood out to me. There's been times where, I'm sitting at this desk and I'm like, I'm really the principal. Like you kind of have that imposter syndrome come through a little bit. And I think that that's really what I was thinking a lot about when I was reading about the self-trust components in this chapter is, you know, you start to get those things, you start to accomplish those things over your career, and you get those tasks done, and you've made change, and you've done different things that are great for your community, and that stuff starts to kind of go away, and that imposter syndrome doesn't feel like it's as prevalent anymore. But I think that also then circles back to the discipline, being, taking your time to be diligent about what you're doing, and organized and structured, and meet and trying to get to as many people and build as many relationships as possible, holding yourself accountable to that when you might think, hey, maybe I'm not doing as well with those things, I need to kind of readjust. And that's really what I think this chapter was for the most for me, and I think it probably would be for any principal that reads it. It's a good mirror to who you are and what you're doing. And yeah, I mean, I think that once you kind of take a close look at yourself, and you're true with yourself, that self-trust factor goes quite high.
So, just to wrap things up, if you were going to talk about this book with any principals or assistant principals, what do you think is kind of the key takeaway?
Yeah, I was just talking with my just the other day, and I think that like I said earlier, it's a good mirror to yourself. And what are you doing professionally? What are you doing personally? Where might you be losing that trust? Where might you be able to do a little bit better with those relationships? At the end of the day, this is a relationship business. It's a relationship position. And if we're not consistently going back to ourselves and taking a look in the mirror about how how we work on those relationships, how we develop those relationships, how people feel they can trust us or not trust us, then we're not doing ourselves service in terms of being the best we can be in our position. So, if any people are listening, I would highly recommend they at least do that quiz on that in this chapter and really kind of take a good, honest look about what the results say. Because I think you can't help but walk away with a couple of different modifications or changes you can make to how you operate.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I know things are crazy busy this time of year, so
Just a little bit,
just
right?
a little bit. So thank you for taking the time to do some
Yeah.
reading and some personal reflection. It's great to connect with you, and I'd
Yeah.
love to circle back and talk to you about how your test scores are looking. That sounds
Yeah,
awesome.
absolutely. And
Take care.
we're big on history at Rochester, so it's
Oh,
always
yeah.
nice for principal number 15 to talk to principal number 12 again. So we keep track of that stuff here. We're big at tradition and history here. So,
Awesome, for sure. All right.
all right.
Number 12 will come back.
All right. There we go. Sounds good.
All right. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye-bye. That wraps up episode 3 in our conversation on the first wave, self-trust. In episode 4, we'll continue with the 4 cores of credibility, which runs pages 61 through 128. I'll be joined by Monty Kelly, the principal at Fruitport Middle School, to talk about integrity, intent, capabilities, and results, and how they play out in school leadership. So take some time to read pages 61 through 128 and then join us as we dig into the foundations of credibility. Until next time, keep leading with trust.